So this talk turns out, without any coordination, is going to be largely a duplication of what Emil just talked about. I'm going to be talking about the Spotify development culture, and in particular some aspects of how it sort of stems from, I guess, Swedish culture and how it's developed over time. Very short background on myself. My name is Niklas Gustavsson. I work in our development office in Gothenburg on the Swedish west coast. But let's start out with what Spotify is. For those of you who have never heard about Spotify or never tried it as a user, we attempt to be a decent music streaming service. Basically, the idea is that you should be able to listen to all the music you want, and it should work as well as using a CD or whatever you use before. As a company, we've been growing very fast. So we were founded in Sweden, started out as a small startup, and basically when we launched, after quite a few years of negotiations with labels and building our product, since then we've been growing very fast, and we're now at more than 60 million monthly active users, and we're more than 1,500 employees in, I don't know, a shitload of countries where we all have offices. During this time, we're in a highly competitive environment. We continuously have plenty of competitive companies that want to do the same thing that we do. So we have a need to maintain a velocity, a high velocity in our product development. This, obviously, when you grow very fast, can be a problem. And Spotify comes from quite a strong tech background. Basically, the company started as a group of friends, I guess, that came from KTH, one of the tech universities in Sweden, basically started Spotify. So it has a strong tech background for whatever strengths and weaknesses that comes with that. I stole this tagline from Volvo, who's now running a lot of ads using this, and Zlatan or whatever. So what I'm going to present today are three themes around how Spotify turned out the way it is. And all of these are somewhat based on, like I said, Swedish or Nordic, I guess, culture. And first off, and this is the obvious one. So we're obviously about music. And for whatever reason, and Sweden has a very strong music culture. There are plenty of articles and actual scientific studies that studies this and are sort of looking into why Sweden has become, per capita, the biggest music exporting country in the world. And there's plenty of fairly famous artists coming from Sweden. And I would argue that one of the main reasons behind this is something that is called kommunala musikskolan in Swedish, or nowadays kulturskolan, which is basically a music school run by the municipal agency, where kids can freely learn to play an instrument or join a choir, or nowadays learn to dance, or the full scale of culture. And this means that any kid, including, this is one of my sons, he's learning to play drums. He's certainly no Dave Grohl so far, but he's getting there. And this is extremely prevalent in Sweden. So tons and tons of kids goes to these music schools to learn to become and to appreciate music. And that means that we can get awesome bands like this. Sound tips, doesn't it? This made it to the Billboard #1. I can't stop listening. You might have seen this. This is a map showing the density of metal bands. And as it turns out, quite a few of these now very successful and somewhat famous producers that now produce this easily digestible pop music the Swedish has gotten famous for actually started out as in various metal bands. all these Dennis Pop and whatever they're called, actually started out, they still have their long hair to prove it. And they all started out in this business of music, and in particular in metal. So, well, what we can tell from this is obviously that Swedes likes to gather in small groups and do things together, and that is arguably the worst bridge into my next subject, which is the way that Spotify works, or at least Spotify tech department works internally. And that is that in order to scale out I'm no big fan of the world, but our way of working Agile. When we started out, we were a small company. We basically had one office in Stockholm. We had one single guy in Gothenburg, and that was it. They all worked in a very agile way. But as we grew, the tech department are now more than 500 people, meaning that we've needed to scale this out in some way while maintaining velocity, as I mentioned before. And the way we've opted to do this is by basically dividing the whole development part of the company into very small, very autonomous teams. And we call these squads, for lack of a better name, I guess. This is an example of one of these squads sitting in their team room. Squads are almost always grouped together so they can sit physically together and work as a team. They have a long-term mission of what they're supposed to do. This can be a sort of finite task that they're supposed to solve, and when they solve that, we will dissolve the squad. Or it can be a more long-term mission. So the squad that I primarily work in, we have a very long-term mission of basically we're going to be around forever, maybe. With these squads, since they're given a very high degree of autonomy, so we have this thing where we want teams to be loosely coupled but tightly aligned. The company wants to work in one direction. We want to ship stuff that is useful to our users. But we allow teams a very high degree of autonomy on how to solve these issues. So basically we give teams a mission, and then they're very much free to solve that mission or solve those questions themselves. So it's up to the team to do this. And this also means that we have none of the matrix-style architects in the company. We actually have one or maybe two guys that call themselves architects in the entire company. All the design work happens within the teams. The teams get to choose whatever tools they need to solve their problem. We have a sort of common set of storage options and languages that we prefer to use, but on top of that, it's up to the team to decide how they best can solve the problem. And that means that we need very little synchronization in between teams. Teams can move at a very high velocity and solve their problems extremely efficiently, I would say, compared to places where I worked before. It also means that since teams own their entire workflow, so from the getting the idea of a feature or getting something that they need to do, they have that responsibility until they do the operations for that. So they build it and they operate everything they do. That means that since they do that, we also need to have very little coordination when it comes to doing releases or deployments. Every team owns their own services that run in our production environment. They have full responsibility for running those and making sure that they're up and running at all times. So this is squads are our sort of development teams. On the other end or the other axis of the organizations, we have something that chapters. Chapters is where your personal development happens and where you can share knowledge with other developers with sort of works in the same areas as yourself. So we might have a chapter of backend developers or a chapter of QAs that then will be spread into a bunch of different squads. And that means you have your manager in the chapter, so the chapter lead is your manager. And that means that we can set up and dissolve squads as needed depending on our needs when it comes to delivering stuff to users. And if this stuff interests you, there are some excellent videos and blog posts that we published before, primarily by a guy called Henrik Kniber, who's somewhat famous in the Agile community, that describes in much more detail on how we do this and how this works in practice. But none of this would happen if there weren't any people at Spotify. So Emil was very much into previous speakers as well on what it means to be a company in a very small market like Sweden. So we have 9 million people. At this point, pretty much everyone that's a grown-up is a Spotify user. So it's quite hard for us to grow in Sweden. But this means that as a company, you pretty much from the start, if you want to be a big, successful company, you pretty much from the start need to plan to go global. And that's very much what Spotify has done. And we've said from the very beginning that we want to provide all the world's music to our users. And we want to do this in all markets. We're not there yet. I think we're launched in 58 or so countries. But we're getting there, slowly but steadily. And this is very important for us as a company. I mean, we're now launching in countries which are, when it comes to infrastructure or user behavior, very different from Sweden. So while we started as a Swedish company, we very much needed to adapt to being a good product in many other markets. So again, like Emil said, in Sweden we have an extremely good network infrastructure, meaning that delivering audio content is somewhat easy in Sweden. We can do that with extremely low latency and good bandwidth. Doing the same thing in the Philippines, for example, where we're also launched, is a completely different thing. And that means that we need to reconsider how our product works and how we're going to approach users with our product. And the same thing with Spotify. So I said that we started out as a small Swedish company, but as we've grown, we've been able to attract a lot of people from all around the world. And this is again I shouldn't say problem, but it's an effect of being a company in a very small country. So even though Swedish universities are fairly successful in turning out good software engineers or QAs or whatever the training they have, for a company of the size of Spotify, it's really hard to find really good people to hire. And that means that we need to go global to find people to hire. And we've very much done that. And since we have a somewhat strong brand, we've also been able to do this. So last we counted, I think it was in November, in our Stockholm office we now have people from 63 different countries working. So while we started as a Swedish company and with the Swedish, I guess, culture as an input to this company, now it's a highly multicultural company, which is awesome when it comes to building a company, when it comes to building a product for a global audience. And while Sweden might now have a racist or, well, I guess, social conservative party in our parliament, Spotify is an awesome example of how a community of people from a lot of many and a broad cultural background can come together and work as one, and everyone brings their part to the company. Obviously, there are also problems with this. For example, the housing situation in Stockholm is particularly bad. So it's a problem moving from wherever in the world to Stockholm, and basically you have no place to live, and it's an extremely big investment for you to be able to stay around in Sweden. So this is not a problem, an experience without any problems, and it's particularly hard for those moving to Spotify. But all in all, I would say it's been extremely successful for us as a culture within the company. That was it.